Elara Voss stood at the tall windows of the Ashworth Public Library, watching the water trace silver rivers down the ancient glass. The building was 200 years old, a Gothic Revival monument to knowledge that the city had forgotten. Its spires reached toward a perpetually gray sky, and its halls held the musty perfume of 10,000 books slowly returning to dust. She was 34 years old, and she had worked here for 11 years. In that time, she had watched the staff dwindle from 12 to 3, had seen the funding cut and cut again, had witnessed the slow bleeding of patrons, until now on nights like this, she was often entirely alone. The library closed at 9. It was nearly midnight, and she remained. This was her ritual. After the doors locked and the silence settled like snow, she would walk the aisles with a flashlight, running her fingers along the spines of books that no one borrowed anymore. She would climb the spiral staircase to the restricted collection on the 4th floor, where the oldest volumes lived in climate-controlled darkness. She would sit in the reading room, where gaslight fixtures had been converted to electricity a century ago, and she would read. Tonight, however, she had a different purpose. The book sat on her desk in the restoration room, wrapped in acid-free tissue paper. It was not supposed to exist. According to every catalog, every database, every record the library possessed, the volume she had discovered 3 weeks ago in a collapsed section of the basement storage had never been accessioned, never been cataloged, never been known. It was bound in leather so dark it seemed to drink the light. The pages were vellum, hand-cut and hand-sewn, covered in text written in an ink that shifted between brown and deep red, depending on the angle. The language was Latin, but older than any Latin she had studied, with word forms and grammatical structures that predated the classical period. The margins were filled with annotations in at least 4 different hands, spanning what appeared to be centuries. And on the first page, in letters of faded gold, was a name: Alexander Valeriu Draculescu. Elara had spent 3 weeks researching that name. She had found almost nothing. A few obscure references in Romanian folklore collections, a single mention in a medieval chronicle from the Carpathian region, a fragment of a letter preserved in a German university archive that spoke of the one who does not die, who has watched the mountains rise and the rivers change their courses. What she had found, eventually, was an address. The envelope sat beside the book, addressed in her careful librarian's hand to a post office box in a town so small it barely appeared on maps. She had written a simple letter explaining the discovery and offering to return the volume to its rightful owner, whoever that might be. She had expected no response, or perhaps a polite acknowledgement from some distant descendant. What she had received 4 days ago was a single card of heavy cream paper, embossed with a seal she did not recognize. The message was brief: "I will come for it. Tonight." AVD. The clock on the wall showed 12 minutes past midnight when the lights flickered. Elara looked up from the book she had been pretending to read. The fluorescent tubes in the restoration room buzzed, dimmed, then steadied. She told herself it was the storm. The building's electrical system was as ancient as everything else here, and lightning had been splitting the sky for hours. She did not believe herself. The silence that followed was different from ordinary silence. It was the silence of held breath, of paused heartbeats, of the moment between lightning and thunder. The air in the room grew cold, then colder still, until she could see the ghost of her exhalation hanging before her face. "Miss Voss." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. It was deep and soft, accented with something old, something European, something that made her think of mountain passes and ancient forests, and the sound of wolves in winter darkness. She turned. He stood in the doorway that had been empty a moment before. Tall, impossibly tall it seemed, though perhaps that was only the way he filled the space, the way his presence expanded to touch every corner of the room. He wore black, entirely black, a coat that swept to his ankles over clothes that belonged to no particular era. His hair was dark and long, pulled back from a face that was beautiful in the way that grief is beautiful, in the way that winter is beautiful, in the way that the moment before death is beautiful. His eyes were the color of amber held before a flame. They did not blink. "You are Alexander," Elara said. Her voice did not shake. She was surprised by this. "I am." He stepped into the room. His footsteps made no sound. "And you are the keeper of books who found what was lost." "How did you get in?" "The doors are locked. The security system, doors open for me." He moved closer. The cold moved with him, and with the cold came a scent like old stone and fallen leaves, and something else, something copper bright and ancient. "Locks forget their purpose. Systems fail. This has always been true." He stopped at the edge of her desk, looking down at the wrapped book with an expression she could not read. Longing, perhaps, or sorrow, or the particular exhaustion of someone who has felt the same emotion so many times that it has worn grooves in their soul. "You know what I am?" he said. It was not a question. "Yes." "You are not afraid." "No." She paused. "Should I be?" He looked at her then, truly looked, and she felt the weight of centuries in his gaze. She felt the accumulated nights, the endless parade of human faces that had passed before those amber eyes, the crushing patience of immortality. "Perhaps," he said softly, "perhaps you should be. I have done terrible things in my long existence. I have been a monster in truth, as well as legend. I have taken lives by the thousand. I have watched empires burn and bathed in the blood of the fallen. And now I am tired." He reached out one long-fingered hand and rested it on the wrapped book. "Now I seek only peace, and the company of old memories, and the silence of forgotten places." Elara watched him. In the flickering light, she could see the translucence of his skin, the architecture of bone beneath flesh that seemed almost too perfect, too still. He did not breathe. She realized she had not seen him blink since he arrived. "The book," she said. "What is it?" "My history." His fingers traced the outline beneath the tissue paper. "Written by my own hand, across 7 centuries. Every life I took, every love I lost, every moment when I believed I might find redemption, and every moment when that hope died." He paused. "I lost it in 1847. I was unwell. I had slept for a long time, and when I woke, many things had changed. The house where I had hidden it was gone, demolished to make way for progress. I assumed it was destroyed. It was in our basement, in a section that collapsed during the earthquake of 1906. No one had been down there for decades. Fate, he said, has a peculiar sense of humor. Why did you write it? He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter still. So that someone, someday, might understand. So that when I finally find the courage to end my existence, there will be a record. Not of the monster the stories describe, but of the man who became that monster, and the centuries he spent trying to become something else. Elara felt something shift in her chest. Pity, perhaps, or recognition. She had spent her own years in this crumbling temple of forgotten words, watching the world outside move faster and faster while she remained still, surrounded by the voices of the dead preserved in ink and paper. She knew something about loneliness. She knew something about being a keeper of things that no longer mattered to anyone. "Take it," she said. "It's yours. I only wanted to see it return to where it belonged." He looked at her again, and this time there was something new in his ancient eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or wonder. "You want nothing in return? It's a book. It belongs to you. Returning it is simply correct. Most humans," he said slowly, "would ask for something. Wealth, power, eternal life." His lips curved in something that might have been a smile, bitter and beautiful. Eternal life, especially. They cannot imagine that immortality is not a gift, but a sentence. "I'm a librarian," Elara shrugged. "I've read enough stories to know how those bargains end." He did not leave. Elara was not sure why. She had given him what he came for. The book lay unwrapped now on her desk, its dark cover gleaming in the uncertain light, and he stood over it like a man at a grave, his pale fingers spread across the ancient leather. "It's beautiful work," she said, because the silence had grown heavy, and she had never been comfortable with heavy silences. The binding, the calligraphy, whoever made the original volume was a master. "I made it." He did not look up. "In the winter of 1247, in a monastery in the mountains of what is now Romania. The monks believed I was a penitent nobleman. They taught me the art of bookmaking, and I taught them—" He paused. "I taught them to fear the night." "Did you kill them?" "Yes." The word was flat, empty of justification or apology. "I was young, barely a century into my existence. I had not yet learned that violence begets only more violence, that blood repaid with blood creates a debt that can never be settled. And now you've learned? Now I have killed so many that the faces blur together. Now I have loved and lost so often that I cannot remember all their names. Now I am—" He finally looked at her. "Now I am what centuries of solitude and regret create. Something less than a monster, perhaps, but far less than a man." Elara should have been frightened. She knew this intellectually, the way she knew that fire was hot and water was wet. Here was a creature of nightmare, a predator who had stalked the human race for 700 years, confessing to atrocities that would have filled this library's shelves with records of horror, but she had spent too many years with ghosts to fear them. The books she loved were full of dead voices, dead ideas, the preserved thoughts of minds that had turned to dust centuries ago. In a way, she had spent her entire adult life in the company of the immortal, not in flesh, but in word. "Would you like to see the rest of the collection?" she asked. He blinked. It was the first time she had seen him do so. "I'm sorry?" "The restricted collection, 4th floor. We have manuscripts dating back to the 12th century, illuminated texts, early printed books, a first folio Shakespeare that everyone thinks is a reproduction, but I've tested the paper, and I'm certain it's genuine." She smiled slightly. "It's not as old as you, but it's the closest I can offer." For a long moment, he stared at her as though she had spoken in a language he did not understand. Then, slowly, something changed in his face. The mask of ancient sorrow cracked, just slightly, and beneath it she glimpsed something that might have been wonder. "You would show me books," he said, "after everything I have told you. You told me you were tired and seeking peace." Elara stood and picked up her flashlight. "I know a great deal about both of those things, and I find that books help." They climbed the spiral staircase in silence, her footsteps echoing on the iron treads, his making no sound at all. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating dust motes that danced like stars in the black void of the stairwell. The restricted collection was kept in a single large room that had once been a ballroom back when the building had served as a private mansion, before its donation to the city. The ceiling was painted with faded cherubs and clouds, and the walls were lined with glass-fronted cases that protected the library's treasures from light and time. Elara unlocked the door and stepped inside. She did not turn on the overhead lights, they were too harsh for these fragile pages, but instead lit the small lamps placed throughout the room, their warm glow filling the space with amber shadows. Alexander moved through the room like a man moving through a cathedral. He paused before each case, his amber eyes scanning the spines, his expression shifting through emotions too subtle and numerous to name. Here was a creature who had watched the printing press transform the world, who had seen knowledge spread like wildfire across continents, who had witnessed the birth of every literary movement for 7 centuries. "This one," he said, stopping before a case near the window. His voice was strange, tight, almost breathless, though she knew he did not need to breathe. "This is impossible." Elara moved to his side. Inside the case was a small volume bound in faded blue leather, its cover stamped with a design of intertwined roses. "The Rose Anthology," she said. "Anonymous collection of love poetry, circa 1580. We're not sure of the origin. It was donated with a larger collection in the 1920s. "I know its origin." His hand pressed flat against the glass, as though he could reach through it. "I wrote it. For Margaret." The name emerged like a wound reopening. "A merchant's daughter in Prague. I loved her for 3 years before she discovered what I was. I gave her this book on the night she fled from me. I thought she destroyed it. I thought she destroyed everything that reminded her of the monster who had deceived her. Perhaps she couldn't." Elara's voice was soft. "Perhaps, despite everything, she couldn't bring herself to destroy what you had created together." He turned to look at her, and she saw that his eyes were wet. She had not known that vampires could weep. "How do you do that?" he asked. "Do what?" "Speak of things you cannot possibly understand as though they were simple, as though love and loss and 400 years of wondering were matters easily resolved." "I don't understand," Elara admitted. "I can't imagine 400 years of anything, but I've read a lot of love stories, and they all seem to end the same way, with 2 people who could have been happy if they had just been brave enough to believe in each other." He laughed. It was a terrible sound, hollow and sharp, but it was also genuinely laughter, and something in it suggested that he had not laughed in a very long time. "You are remarkable," he said. "I have met thousands of humans. I have watched them for centuries, but I have never met one quite like you." "I'm a librarian in a dying library," she shrugged. "I spend my nights with books that no one reads, in a building that no one visits, doing work that no one values. I am the opposite of remarkable." "No," he shook his head slowly. "You are a keeper of memory, a guardian of the voices of the dead. You have devoted your life to preserving what others would throw away, to protecting what the world has forgotten. That is the most remarkable thing I can imagine." The night deepened around them. They sat in the reading room now, surrounded by the warm glow of lamps and the musty perfume of old paper. The book of his history lay open on the table between them, and Alexander was showing her entries, translating the archaic Latin, explaining the context of events she had only read about in textbooks. "Here," he said, pointing to a page dense with cramped text. The fall of Constantinople. I was there. I watched the greatest city in the world burn, and I wept for the libraries that burned with it. You were in Constantinople. I was many places. His finger moved down the page. Rome, during the plague. London, when the Great Fire swept through. Paris, in the Terror. I have been present at so many endings that I sometimes believe I am an ending myself, that where I walk, destruction follows. Or perhaps, Elara said carefully, you were drawn to those places because some part of you still wanted to help, because despite everything, you couldn't stop yourself from caring. He looked at her sharply. You see too much. I read too much. There's a difference. She smiled. The stories in books teach you to look for patterns. And the pattern I see in you is not a monster seeking destruction. It's a man seeking purpose, again and again, and losing it again and again, and somehow never quite giving up. I gave up many times, and yet you're still here. He had no answer for that. The clock struck 3, its chimes echoing through the empty building. Elara realized with some surprise that hours had passed, that she had lost herself so completely in conversation that she had forgotten to be tired. I should go, Alexander said, but he made no move to rise. The dawn is not far off. Does it really burn you, sunlight? It weakens me. Prolonged exposure would destroy me, yes. But I have walked in daylight before, briefly, when the need was great. He paused. It is unpleasant. Like standing too close to a fire, feeling your skin tighten and crack, but survivable in small doses. That must make the world feel very small, only half of it available to you. I have grown accustomed to it. He looked toward the window where the first pale suggestion of dawn was beginning to lighten the sky. In truth, I prefer the night. It is quieter, more honest. The darkness does not pretend to be anything other than what it is. I know what you mean. Elara followed his gaze. I've never liked mornings, all that aggressive optimism. The night feels more real somehow. He turned back to her, and there was something in his expression she had not seen before. Decision, perhaps, or hope. You have done me a great kindness, he said. You have returned something precious to me, and you have given me something even more precious. A night of conversation, of connection, that I had almost forgotten was possible. He paused. I would like to repay you. I told you, I don't want... I know what you told me. He held up a hand. And I will not offer you eternal life, or wealth, or power. But I can offer you something else, a single wish. One thing within my considerable capabilities. Ask, and if it is within my power to grant, I will grant it. Elara was silent. She thought of all the things she had wanted in her life, all the dreams that had slowly faded as the years passed. She thought of the library crumbling around her. She thought of the loneliness that had become so familiar she barely noticed it anymore. She thought of all the books she would never write, all the adventures she would never have, all the loves that had passed her by while she sat alone among the whispered words of the dead. I want to know, she said finally, what happened to Margaret? He stared at her. What? The merchant's daughter? The one you wrote the poetry for? You said she fled from you, but you never said what happened to her afterward. Did she find happiness? Did she live a good life? You could ask for anything, he said slowly. Anything in the world. And you want to know about a woman who died 4 centuries ago? I want to know if she was okay. Elara shrugged. I want to know if your story had a happy ending, even if you weren't part of it. Because if she was happy, if she went on to live and love and have children and grandchildren and eventually die peacefully in her bed, then maybe it wasn't all tragedy. Maybe some good came from your time together. Alexander was very still. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, his ancient eyes unreadable. Then, slowly, he began to speak. She married, he said, a clockmaker, a kind man by all accounts. They had 4 children, and she lived to see her grandchildren born. She died at the age of 67, in her sleep, with her family around her. He paused. I know this because I watched, from a distance, always from a distance. But I could not stop myself from watching. I needed to know that she was safe, that she was happy, that the monster she had fled had not broken something essential in her. Did she ever speak of you? Once. His voice was barely a whisper. On her deathbed, her daughter recorded her final words in a letter. She said that she had loved a man who could not be loved, and that leaving him was the hardest thing she ever did, and that she hoped he had found peace. Elara felt tears prick at her eyes. She still loved you. She loved who she thought I was, the man I pretended to be, the lie I told her every moment we were together. Maybe. Elara reached across the table and laid her hand over his. His skin was cold as marble, but she did not flinch. Or maybe she loved the parts of you that were real, the poetry, the tenderness, the desire to be better than what you were. Maybe those parts aren't a lie, even if other things were. He looked down at her hand on his. His expression was that of a man confronted with something impossible, a miracle perhaps, or a ghost. How do you know these things? He asked. How do you understand what I have never been able to articulate, even to myself? I don't know anything. She squeezed his hand gently. I just read a lot of books, and books are full of people who think they're monsters, but are really just people who made mistakes and are trying to do better. The sky outside the window was pink with approaching dawn. Alexander rose, gathering his book carefully in his arms. He moved toward the door, then stopped. I have lived 700 years, he said, without turning around. I have seen wonders and horrors beyond imagining. I have loved and lost and killed and mourned. I have been a king and a beggar, a scholar and a soldier, a monster and a myth. He paused. But tonight, in this forgotten library with a remarkable woman, I have felt something I thought I had lost forever. What's that? Hope. He turned to face her. The belief that perhaps I am not beyond redemption, that perhaps the story is not over, that perhaps there is still time to become something other than what I have been. Elara stood. What will you do now? I don't know. Return to my solitude, perhaps. I have a house far from here, where the world rarely intrudes. He hesitated. Or perhaps I might stay. For a while. There is a library here full of books I have not read, and a librarian who seems willing to tolerate my company. The library closes at 9, Elara said, but I'm here most nights until midnight, doing restoration work, sometimes later. I am familiar with late nights, and the restricted collection is always available to me. I could use someone to help with translations. I am fluent in many dead languages. They looked at each other across the dusty room, two creatures of the night, two keepers of old things, two souls who had somehow found each other in the vast loneliness of existence. I should warn you, Alexander said, that I am terrible company. I am morose and brooding and given to long silences. I have a tendency to speak in riddles and dwell on tragedies. I am, in short, everything that a sensible person would avoid. I work alone in a dying library surrounded by books that no one reads. Elara smiled. I am the last person who should lecture anyone about sensible life choices. He laughed again, still hollow, still bitter, but less so than before. A door opening, perhaps, a window letting in light. Then I will return, he said. Tomorrow night, if you will have me. I'll be here. He nodded once formally, like a prince of an age long past, acknowledging a lady of the court. Then he gathered his coat around him and walked toward the door. Alexander, he stopped. The wish, she said. You said you would grant me one wish. I only asked about Margaret. You did. So I still have a wish? He turned back, one eyebrow raised. That is not how wishes work. You made a request. I fulfilled it. But it wasn't really a wish for me. It was a wish for you to tell me something that would help you see yourself differently. She crossed her arms. I think that means I still get a real wish. For a moment, he simply stared at her. Then slowly, a genuine smile spread across his face. Not bitter, not hollow, but warm and wondering, and almost young. You are, he said, the most extraordinary human I have ever met. Very well. One wish. To be claimed whenever you choose, for whatever purpose you require. I'll hold you to that. I do not doubt it. He opened the door, letting in the pale light of early dawn. Until tomorrow, Miss Voss. Until tomorrow, Mr. Draculesht. He was gone between one heartbeat and the next, vanishing into the graying morning as though he had never been. Only the faint scent of old stone and autumn leaves remained, fading slowly in the quiet air. Elara stood alone in the reading room for a long time, watching the light strengthen outside the windows. She thought about everything that had happened. She thought about the stories she had read, all those tales of vampires and mortals, of darkness and light, of love and terror. She thought about how the stories usually ended, in tragedy, in sacrifice, in someone or something being destroyed. But this was not a story. This was her life, and she got to decide how it went. She picked up the lamp and began making her way back through the library, extinguishing lights as she went, preparing to lock up and go home. She would sleep for a few hours, she decided, eat something, perhaps read a book, and tomorrow night she would return to this crumbling temple of forgotten words, and a vampire king would come to her, and they would sit together in the darkness and talk about the weight of centuries and the price of immortality and all the other things that mattered so much and so little. Perhaps he would stay for one night, perhaps for 100. Perhaps they would become friends or colleagues or something stranger still. She did not know. She could not know. But for the first time in many years, Elara Voss found that she was looking forward to finding out. The months that followed were unlike anything Elara had ever experienced. Alexander returned the next night, as promised, and the night after that, and the night after that. He would arrive after dark, slipping through the locked doors as though they were made of mist, and he would find her wherever she was, in the restoration room, in the stacks, in the restricted collection, and they would talk. They talked about everything, about the books she loved and the ones she had never had time to read, about the places he had been and the things he had seen, about history as it was written in textbooks and history as it had actually happened, which was often far stranger and more terrible and more wonderful than any book recorded. He helped her with the restoration work, his steady hands and centuries of experience proving invaluable. He translated manuscripts that had baffled scholars for generations. He told her stories that made her laugh, stories that made her weep, stories that kept her awake in her small apartment long after sunrise, staring at the ceiling and marveling at the strange turn her life had taken. And slowly, gradually, something changed between them. It was not romance exactly, not in the conventional sense. He never touched her except accidentally, never spoke of desire or passion, never gave any indication that he saw her as anything more than a companion. She did not expect him to. She was mortal, aging, a brief flicker of warmth in his eternal winter. He was ancient, frozen, a creature whose heart had been turned to stone by centuries of loss. But there was something, a connection, an understanding, the particular intimacy of two souls who recognized in each other a kindred loneliness, a shared devotion to preservation, a mutual love of quiet places and old things. She began to think of him as her friend, and perhaps, in his own way, he began to think of her as the same. The crisis came in spring. It arrived in the form of a letter delivered to the library on a gray morning when the cherry trees outside the windows were just beginning to bloom. The letter bore the official seal of the city, and its contents were exactly what Elara had feared for years. The library was to be closed, the building was to be sold, the collection was to be dispersed, some volumes going to larger institutions, some to private collectors, some simply thrown away. The staff would receive modest severance packages and the heartfelt thanks of the city council. Elara sat in the restoration room with the letter in her hands and felt something inside her break. She had known it was coming. She had known for years. The funding had been cut and cut again. The building had fallen into disrepair. The patrons had dwindled to almost nothing. She had watched the slow death of this place she loved, had witnessed its decline, like a daughter watching a parent succumb to age, and she had known that the end was inevitable. But knowing did not make it hurt any less. "You are distressed." She had not heard him arrive. She never did. He simply was there, beside her, his ancient eyes reflecting the gray light from the windows. "They're closing the library." Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. "The building will be sold, the collection dispersed. Everything I've spent my life protecting will be scattered to the winds." "Ah." He moved to stand beside her, looking down at the letter in her hands. "This is what you feared. I always knew it would happen eventually. I hoped. Hope is a strange thing." His voice was soft. "It sustains us through the darkest nights. And yet, when it fails, the darkness seems blacker than ever." "The books," she whispered. "Some of them are irreplaceable. Some of them exist nowhere else in the world. The restricted collection alone will be preserved." She looked up at him. "What?" "The wish." He met her eyes, and in his ancient gaze she saw something that might have been determination. "You never claimed it. And now, I think, is the time. You can't save the library. Not even you have that kind of power. No, but I have something else." He turned to face the window, his profile sharp against the gray light. "I have accumulated considerable resources over 7 centuries, properties in many countries, investments that have compounded for generations, wealth that I have never found a purpose for, because what does an immortal need with money?" Elara felt her heart begin to race. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I can buy this building. I am saying that I can fund its restoration and its operation in perpetuity. I am saying that I can ensure that every book within these walls remains exactly where it belongs, protected and preserved, for as long as there are readers to treasure them." That's impossible. The costs alone, money is the least of my concerns." He turned back to her. "The question is whether you will accept it, whether you will allow me to preserve this place, and whether you will continue to serve as its guardian." "Why?" Her voice cracked. "Why would you do this?" "Because you showed me that I am not beyond redemption. Because you treated me with kindness when I expected fear. Because in all my centuries of existence, I have never met anyone who loved anything the way you love these books, and I find that I cannot bear to watch that love be destroyed." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "And because I have finally found something worth protecting, someone worth protecting, a place where I might belong." The negotiations took months. Alexander, it turned out, was formidable in ways Elara had not anticipated. He produced paperwork, lawyers, financial records that documented centuries of careful investment. He navigated the bureaucracy of the city with the patience of someone who had watched governments rise and fall for 700 years. He charmed the officials, reassured the preservationists, silenced the skeptics. And in the end, he bought the library. The building was transferred to a private trust, funded in perpetuity, with Elara installed as its director. The restoration began immediately, not just preservation, but renewal, new climate control systems for the fragile manuscripts, updated security to protect the treasures, lighting that honored the Gothic beauty of the architecture while providing the illumination that scholars needed. And one other change, known only to Elara. The restoration room in the basement was converted into living quarters, simple, elegant, lightless. A place where a creature of the night might rest during the deadly hours of day, secure in the knowledge that he was home, because that was what the library had become, a home for both of them. The years passed. Elara grew older, gray streaked her dark hair, lines formed at the corners of her eyes. Her hands, once steady, began to tremble slightly when she worked with the most delicate manuscripts. Alexander did not change. He remained as he had always been, pale, beautiful, ancient, ageless. He watched her age with an expression that she could not quite read, something between sorrow and reverence, as though he were witnessing a flower bloom and fade in a single moment of accelerated time. They never spoke of it, not directly, but sometimes, late at night, when the library was silent and they sat together in the reading room, surrounded by the weight of centuries, he would look at her with such tenderness that she almost believed he might break his own rules. He never did, and she never asked him to, because what they had was enough. What they had was something neither of them had ever expected to find, a partnership, a friendship, a love that defied easy categorization. He was her companion in the preservation of beautiful things, and she was his proof that humanity was worth saving. It was, she thought, the best possible ending to a story that had never been supposed to end at all. She was 67 years old when she finally made her decision. The library was thriving. The collection had grown. The restoration work had attracted scholars from around the world, and the building itself had been recognized as a historical landmark. There was a waiting list of young librarians eager to take on the work, a staff of dedicated preservationists, a network of supporters and donors that would ensure the institution's survival long after she was gone. She was, in short, no longer needed, but she did not want to leave. She found Alexander in the restricted collection, as she often did, reading a manuscript by the light of a single lamp. He looked up when she entered, and something in her face must have told him that this was not an ordinary visit. "You have made a decision," he said. "Yes." "Will you tell me what it is?" She crossed the room to stand before him. In the lamplight, she could see the fine lines of his face, the architecture of beauty that had not changed in 7 centuries. She could see the loneliness in his ancient eyes, the loneliness that had been there when she met him, but that had softened over the years into something gentler. "I want to use my wish," she said. He went very still. After all this time? After all this time. And what is it you wish for?" She took a deep breath. She had thought about this for years. She had weighed the costs and the consequences. She had considered the implications, the losses, the gains, the endless stretch of time that would unfold before her. And she had decided. "I wish," she said, "to stay." He stared at her. "Stay? With you, in this library, for as long as it stands." She met his eyes steadily. "I know what I'm asking. I know what it means. I know that I will watch everyone I have ever known grow old and die while I remain unchanged. I know that the world will move on without me, that everything I have ever loved will fade and crumble and be forgotten. I know that there will be centuries of loneliness, centuries of regret, centuries of wondering if I made the right choice." "Then why?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Why would you choose this?" "Because I don't want to leave you." The words were simple, unadorned, true. "Because in all my life, I have never found anything worth staying for. Until now. Until this library. Until you." She paused. "And because I think you need someone who understands what it means to be a keeper of old things. Someone who will be here, night after night, for as long as the darkness lasts." He was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion she had never heard from him before. "You understand what you are asking me to do?" "Yes." "You understand that I will have to, that you will have to." "I understand." "And you still choose this? Knowing everything? Knowing the hunger, the solitude, the endless weight of time?" "I choose this." She reached out and took his hand in hers, warm flesh against cold marble, mortal against immortal, a bridge across centuries. "I choose you. I choose this library and everything in it. I choose to be the guardian of beautiful things for as long as I am able." He looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly he raised her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her fingers, gentle, reverent, full of all the things he had never said. "Then I will grant your wish," he whispered, "and I will be with you, every night, every year, every century, for as long as the library stands, and beyond, if the world allows it." The transformation was not as painful as the stories claimed. Or perhaps she simply did not remember the pain afterward, the way one does not remember the pain of birth, or the pain of falling asleep. She remembered his arms around her, his voice in her ear, the cold that spread through her veins like winter frost. She remembered the last beat of her mortal heart, the last breath of her mortal lungs, the last flutter of her mortal soul. And then she woke. The world was different. Colors were sharper, sounds were clearer. The weight of centuries pressed against her newborn senses like the memory of a dream. She was hungry, so hungry, but Alexander was there, guiding her, teaching her, helping her navigate the terrible beauty of her new existence. The first night was hard. The first week was harder. The first year was a constant struggle between what she had been and what she had become. But she survived, she adapted, she learned, and every night when the sun set and the library opened its doors to the darkness, she was there, standing among the books she loved, in the building she had saved, beside the man who had saved her. Two immortals, two keepers of memory, two souls who had found in each other something worth eternity. The library still stands. If you visit on a summer evening, when the light is golden and the shadows are long, you might see a woman in the restricted collection, her dark hair streaked with silver, her pale hands turning the pages of a manuscript that was old when the printing press was new. She moves with unusual grace, this woman. Her eyes, if you catch them in the right light, seem to glow with an amber fire, and if you listen carefully, you might hear her speaking softly to someone just out of sight, a low voice, an ancient accent, the whisper of centuries. They are happy there, the keepers of the library. Happy in a way that is hard to describe, a way that only makes sense if you understand the peculiar joy of preserving beautiful things against the erosion of time. They have each other, and they have their books, and they have the endless night stretching before them like a road with no end. Sometimes, late in the evening, a young patron will ask about the history of the building, and the woman, Elara they call her, though she has been other names in other places, will smile and say that it is a long story, and perhaps someday she will write it down. She never does. Some stories are too precious to be committed to paper. Some stories are meant only to be whispered in the dark between two souls who have found in each other a reason to go on. But if you are very quiet and very patient and very lucky, you might catch a fragment of it, a word here, a phrase there, drifting through the dusty air like motes of light. A story of a librarian and a vampire king, a story of a book returned and a wish granted, a story of loneliness and connection, of ancient sorrow and fragile hope, a story that, like all the best stories, never really ends. It simply echoes forever in the silence between the stars.